Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on our 8-week guide. I'd start to say by saying thank you for everyone attending. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mark, and I'm the head of client partnership at Elsewhere. So before kicking it off, I'll quickly run through the agenda and the Q&A process. Then I'll pass it over to Leon. So first of all, Leon's going to give a brief intro on himself and Elsewhere. Then we'll kick off the presentation, which will last for roughly about 35 minutes. Then after the presentation, we'll jump into the Q&A. The Q&A session will last for around about 15 minutes. So for the questions, you've got two ways of doing it. So you can send it through the Q&A section at the bottom. You can keep it as yourself open, or you can anonymize it. So yeah, without further ado, over to you, Leon.
Thank you very much, Mark. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for joining us to our webinar on unlocking business productivity in just 8 weeks. Just a quick info about myself. My name is Leon. I'm one of the co-founders of Elsewhere. I'm the Chief Product and Strategy Officer. My history is software engineering. So I wrote for the web, I wrote for Apple devices, and historically I did a degree in art. Was doing art with computers and became a software engineer and just kind of fell in love into it, and moved from that to product. And today I help our clients to set up the strategies to set up their the way that they're going to be solving their problems and opportunities with us. So like Mark said, just repeat that. So I'm going to go through a little bit about us, a bit Elsewhere, a little bit of a plug, some principles and how we approach this work, and then really dive into week by week the 8 weeks plan, and then we're going to leave some time for Q&A. So yeah, let's jump in. So just a bit about Elsewhere to provide you a background of why we think that we know how to do this stuff and why we've developed this methodology. So we're a digital product consultancy. In one sentence, we help leaders harness a cutting-edge approach to design and technology to deliver positive impact for their organizations. Just a few stats to give you an idea. We've been founded in 2011. We have way over 100 client engagements. We're a 60+ team. Everyone on our team is a lead or senior level consultant. So we're a very top-heavy team. Average is 12 years of experience. It kind of varies between 10 and 20 years. This is the way we build the consultancy. So kind of curating the talent. We never took any investment. We're self-owned. We're an independent consultancy, and today that's quite a differentiator in the market. So just to give you an idea about our clients, we stem from big tech. So we built the consultancy around servicing Google 10 years ago. Also, Microsoft been our client. Today, Spotify is one of our biggest clients. However, we really focused on taking this sort of approach, talent, technologies defined in big tech companies and bringing them to more traditional sectors. So we work in financial services, we work in insurance, construction, health, retail. We have quite broad vertical experience. So that's just a little bit about our clients and our partners. There's 3 ways we work with clients. We work around digital strategy, project teams, and digital transformation. So just jump quickly through that. Digital strategy, it's essentially the process you're going to see today. So it's a work, it's a process where we work with you towards an action-oriented business case that puts digital at the center. It's a definition process, and this is what I'm going to be talking through today. We also help our clients with providing project teams that remove every barrier from moving fast and delivering at the highest of outputs. So these are very senior engineers, designers, product people that can co-create, they can work independently. It's not a nearshore, offshore offering. It's a team you would entrust something important to. And we do a lot of work in digital transformations, kind of transformation context, where we help transformation programs deliver consumer-grade customer experience. This is really a big focus for us. So bringing that level of execution of delight that you find in consumer products into B2B and enterprise products, which is most of our focus. Right, so far about Elsewhere, and now I'm going to jump into the meat of it. So just a little bit about what we're doing and some key principles around this work, around this plan, this 8 weeks of defining something. So we're talking about gaining productivity by redesigning processes, which is a very common area of focus for a lot of companies of how do you utilize technology, how do you utilize design, how do you use customer centricity to change how the organization works, from two kind of main areas of focus, from how do you deliver value to your customers, changing how that's done, and how do your employees interact with the processes, with the data the organization has, how can you create a lot of improvements in ways of working, reducing operational costs, that sort of thing. In general, if you look at what we do in these 8 weeks at a very high level, we describe what is there now so everybody can agree on it. And we, as a team that is working on that, and this is applicable for an external team, for an internal team, a team that needs to execute the work, they need to understand the domain, they need to understand the picture, and they need to agree on it with everybody else. Then we need to find the opportunities for improvement. Where can design and technology come in and really produce meaningful change? And then based on that, we redesign the process into a digital one in most cases. I just want to talk a little bit about strategy because it's a very overused word. And I just want to talk about what's, in our opinion, a good strategy is and how that sets this process up for us. So we really believe that strategy should not be blue sky, especially in technology. It has to have a high chance of being accomplished. We really stay away from kind of wishy-washy fluff, and we try to define things that can actually be done. It should create a bridge between the vision and the objectives that lie in grasp, creating really clear goals. And that is, again, so important to be able to have a digital strategy that can be actually implemented. This is a huge gap that we see a lot of times with clients. It should outline and identify the biggest challenges. So it needs to explain what are the challenges that are going to be met on the way and how they're going to be overcome. So this kind of approach of no fluff for a strategic war, it really defines this process. And I want to talk a little bit about kind of the key disciplines, work streams, or that are involved in defining, a piece of a change or a kind of a process that needs to be changed. We're really focused on reducing handoffs and minimizing waste. Again, we're coming from kind of a big tech background, and we're coming from certain ways of working, and we apply that to the strategic work. What we find a lot of times is that strategy is done in isolation, design is done in isolation, and technology is done in isolation. And there's these really expensive and handoffs between these three disciplines. And also we a lot of times find that strategies, when it's done in isolation, is done as far as strategic people will think it should be done. Same with design, same with technology. So it creates a lot of waste and kind of disjoints communication between the disciplines. Our approach is very much about doing just enough, just in time. So we're bringing all these three things into one stream, and work along all three of them at the same time. And we take them as far as we actually need to get to what's important. And what's important in technology is actually getting to the build, getting to the implementation, getting to the customers, getting into starting to implementing the change. You want to move from this phase to the phase of doing as fast as possible. Therefore, this phase should take as little time as possible. And we kind of execute at the same time on product strategy, design, and technology. And I just want to throw this in here as well in terms of how technology should be treated and how it should be viewed. And I think there's sometimes a large gap in organizations around that. Technology is not a commodity. You can't buy technology by the pound. It's a really complex thing that humans do. It's much closer to art than to kind of stamping something out, and needs to be treated in that way. And here is a quote from Richard Feynman, who is kind of one of the fathers of quantum mechanics, and he said that for a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. And this is really about bending reality to fit into your business or into your kind of PR goals or whatever. And that is not possible. You're working within the domain of physics. He produced the quote when he was presenting the report on the Challenger disaster, because he saw how many corners have been bent, how many things have been sped up, how many things been put in place that led to this disaster. So I think this is a very important thing to focus on. One of the key approaches in this, moving away from talking a presentation decks to actually doing, is you want to show and not tell in work that has to do with digital technology. You want to get to the implementation as fast as possible, and you want to deliver value early and often, both to your customers, to your employees, and your stakeholders. Okay, so far, kind of setting up the scene a little bit in terms of how we approach this type of work. And now I'm really going to dive into 8 weeks and how we outline them. So don't kind of focus on this graph, because I will go one by one and talk through them. But I just want to say that on average, we find that this sort of process, depending on complexity, and that's organizational complexity, so kind of, how clear and how aligned people are and how much information they can provide, what sort of access you have to, how complex is what you're trying to achieve. We find that this sort of process takes between 6 to 20 weeks. All of the type of processes that we can touch, most of them are here. This, it can be changed from time to time, but we find that this sort of 8 weeks that I'm walking you through this time is very repeatable. We see this over and over and over again, and there are some changes. And in general, any plan that you do, you should be able to change halfway through. Well, all the time, not just halfway through. And that kind of takes me to my next slide, that we outline these 8 weeks, week by week, but we also try to retain agility within that. So we treat every week as a little sprint, where we start with planning. We decide what we're going to be doing this week. We then execute on the work streams, and then in the end, we have a quick retro to iterate on the process, to potentially iterate on the plan. Through these 8 weeks, there is additional cadence around Steerco and project updates, and I will touch that in a second. But just want to talk a little bit about that agility in the plan. We think that it's super important to use a modern planning tool. We run this sort of process in a Kanban board, so you have kind of your backlog, what is done, what is being worked on, what is being done. Everybody aligns on that. It's super important to maintain that. You want to move into these sort of tools and these sort of processes very early on and execute through that. I just want to touch a little bit about running retros and kind of just agility in general. Don't overindulge here as well, as we set the scene, just enough, just in time. So if we do a retro, it takes an hour. We just go through what's been happening, what went well, what didn't go well, what we still need to learn. So again, very light touch. So I want to talk a little bit about that collaboration and cadence, and just talk about the people that are involved and how they can be involved, because it's in overwhelming majority cases, this process is not in isolation. It's running within an organization, within a part of an organization. It touches a lot of different people. So I just want to kind of discuss how we think about that. So we separate people involved in the project into a few groups. The first group is the most obvious one, and that's the core project team. So this is the people that actually work on this, and that's usually product strategist, product designer, solution architect, or it's usually a very small team. There's also sometimes a client product owner or somebody who's been put in that role. So it could be an MD, but it's a person that is constantly connected to the process. Again, this is very repeatable if you do that internally in an organization as well. You could be servicing a different part of the organization. So who is that closest stakeholder to that is the most available? These people meet daily for 15 minutes for a stand-up. Again, kind of back to that agility, update each other, and they're constantly in the loop of what's going on. They sit within kind of the project Slack channel, and constantly in communication. Then there's the project working group, which is a group that meets weekly for 30 to 45 minutes. They get an unedited exposure to the project. So they see things rough, and they are weekly updated by the team. They have very close alignment to the project. These kind of are the core stakeholders. In our case, a lot of times these are our kind of core clients. These are the people that commission the work. And then there's the oversight group. So this is the most high level group of people that are going to touch the outputs and outcomes of this process. We want to meet them 2-3 times for an hour through the project. It could be a digital committee, it could be your CEO, your CTO, your head of business unit, kind of a person that maybe even not if directly sponsoring the work, it's still kind of coming out of their pocket, and they sometimes need to make very quickly very important decisions. Work is packaged for them and presented in a beautiful and accessible way so they can interact with it meaningfully, considering that they're a little bit out of the project loop. So that's on collaboration and cadence. And yeah, let's jump in and just go week by week what is happening through these 8 weeks. So first week is our kickoff week, where we want to align and get ready. So we take that time to do that. We do a kickoff workshop where we all come together. There's immersion workshops, and we start to prepare for user research. So we kind of ramp up in this week. We do things like that help us to get to know each other. Even if you work relatively closely, you still within this context want to understand a little bit better what each person is bringing into this. We want to iterate on this plan. So a lot of times this plan, between it's being agreed on and it's being signed off, changes happen and you need to update it. You need to download all the information that is provided to you in any kind of document form, and be able to internalize and sometimes reflect on it and build up a kind of an immersion workshop that will allow you to take more information. We should also discuss and outline the risks going ahead. Maybe somebody who is a subject matter expert has not been available for us. It's something that I should have said actually in the previous slide. We'll also have another group of people which is subject matter experts, which we call into workshops throughout the process. That can be, for example, a person that is responsible over the underwriting department. They just need to provide us with information. We start to map out research. So looking at the information that we have, information that we're able to download with workshops, we start to map out what are the holes, where are the gaps, and that where else do we need to bring in to kind of fortify the picture. We prepare for user testing, plan all of the meetings in advance according to the cadence that we discussed. So for example, we have digital board committee, we already pre-booked them into these 8 weeks whenever we need them. We take the different SMEs that we understood we need to meet in this first week, and we pre-book them for the process. So pre-booking seems to be a kind of overlooked and very important part of this process. I want to talk a little bit about remote working because, well, we're obviously doing this webinar remotely, and we are a remote first organization. So Else1 is remote first, and all of our work today with all of our clients across the board is done in a remote context. And we find that it actually made us much better, much faster, allows us to execute at a higher level of quality. I want to touch a little bit on that if this is not a natural thing for some people, and they kind of, in their minds, workshopping means meeting in a room and having whiteboard discussions. We really moved away from that, and we find it an exceptionally successful way of working. So I'm just going to explain about that a little bit. We find it very flat. So as you can see here on screen, everyone is a square on screen. It's an incredibly flattening process. So it allows a lot of opinions to come to the forefront, and it really prevents from somebody taking over a whole meeting and driving it into a certain direction. So we find that the information we gather and the input that we get for people in workshops, it's at a higher quality. It's very fast. So we can do in an hour and a half of work. We never book workshops, remote workshops, to be longer than an hour and a half. If you're doing that, you're doing something wrong, in my opinion. So what took previously half a day or sometimes day of kind of workshopping and walking around and kind of engaging, and we can just come in and execute in an hour. So it makes our work a lot faster and a lot more efficient. What happens very interestingly is that all of the tools that we use are remote and for remote collaboration, and they're digital. So all of this work persists. A workshop that we did today can be accessed 6 months through a URL, something that would never happen if you had a whiteboard. You know, all these post-it notes that you would see in a lot of kind of workshop photography, they get lost. The information gets lost. There's a lot of kind of holes in what you remember and what happened. And in a digital format, it's there forever. It's forever persistent. It's also compostable. So these digital artifacts can move from one tool to another. They're accessible through API. This is a real kind of digitalization of consultancy work that is incredibly powerful, and we lean into a lot and allows us to be very efficient. So I've been talking a lot about workshops and boards, and I want to and touch this because it's very important to understand that you need to put a lot of effort when you jump into a process like this. Our boards are as beautiful as the products we make. This is a quote from one of our designers at a client meeting. And I think you really need to appreciate how much effort you have to go into creating a board like that. So it's very efficient. And when you do come in for 1 hour of working, you come in and you do the work, and it's very clear what's supposed to be happen, what everybody does, what information we're trying to agree on. So just going to show you here a quick board of kind of the level of effort that goes into this workshop before anybody touched it, and how thought through it is. You know, this around audience mapping, and you know, this sticky notes for every participant to vote with. There are kind of devices where you put in place that help us to define different parts of work. So there's a lot of pre-effort that goes into a workshop like this. So when we are there, we execute it very efficiently. Okay, so jump into week 2. It's a week where we do our user research, we understand the state of play, and we start to build the current blueprint. And I will touch that and explain what that means. So we do the research in week 2, and this is where things can get a little bit expanded. Sometimes you know, we could do more than a week, sometimes 2 or 3 weeks. It depends on the complexity. But again, staying true to just enough, just in time. We don't overindulge in this. We get as much customer information at this stage as we need to be able to move to the next phase. We never interview more than 1 5 customer group, for example, or employee group. So we kept it recently relatively small, because we feel that we get the same information over and over if you look at bigger groups. There's different types of research that can be done. So customer interviews, the most obvious one. We do stakeholder interviews where we try to align different stakeholders onto one page. Subject matter interviews, subject matter experts interviews. So like I mentioned, maybe an underwriting department, maybe a person that is responsible over different processes, maybe salespeople, where we're trying to understand how people work and extract kind of the hidden parts of the process from them. We could also send questionnaires to measure sentiment. So we do that as a quantitative tool to research a space that we're interested in. We then map the current service flow. So basically, we create a blueprint that maps what we see, the process that we see, to be able to articulate to ourselves and also articulate it to our stakeholders and agree on it, that this is what we actually see in the organization. Majority of the organizations don't really know how exactly a process is running. In majority of the cases, it's very interesting, but that is that what seems to be happening. And we start to shape that blueprint. So I talked a little bit about remote workshopping. I want to talk about remote research, because all of our research is done remotely. I think if you in 2022 bring people into kind of like a lab to do research on them, it's a total waste of time. It's incredibly indulgent. It's not true for kind of staying just enough, just in time. So I want to talk a little bit about remote research, because it's a huge topic where the digital kind of tooling brought a lot of value and really changed how you do research. So we do everything through Hangouts and Zooms. That's kind of like obvious as you're experiencing it today. We also then really lean into this digital artifact that is being produced. We record these Zoom sessions. We use a tool called Dovetail. There are a few tools in this category, but basically it's a tool that is built around user research. I highly recommend you to use something like that because you can start automating some of the tasks. And one of the most important one is you can transcribe automatically, and then you can use tagging to be able to start group information and really get the insight out of the research. And the user research work is really about producing the insights out of the user research, not the user research itself. There is some art to it, but the important work is being able to produce something that can be then used by a team that builds solutions. So you should be using something like that. That's very, very important. And then, we get to tag the videos, transcribe the videos, and then this information emerging from that can integrate with other tools, can integrate with Miro, you can collaborate on it. And we really take all of the insights, all of the process around that, and we synthesize it and document in a tool like Notion, which is another very important part of the process. And that is your digital repository for this entire process. And I will talk about that a little bit. So we use Notion, which is kind of like a Confluence on steroids. So first of all, it's not an Atlassian product, which is great. And second of all, it's a modern product that's been designed recently. So it really takes advantage of the recent thinking about productivity tools. Notion is kind of essentially a database that you can use as non-engineer to start connect things and start and categorize things. And all of our information around this process goes into a tool like Notion. So all of the research goes into that, and then we can start to find meaning in it, start to categorize it. We can collaborate on it. This repository becomes the single source of truth for the entire project lifecycle. So you can see an example here for an advertising client of ours where we're building an advertising tool for them. How we start to think about the information we receive from them, which is a combination of download, user research, subject matter experts interviews, kind of how their organization thinks about the services, the products, the data, the customers. So we can build these understandings, really translate quite nebulous information into meaningful, logical structures that then really help you to design and build your solutions. Another thing I want to talk about, because I already kind of touched it, and it's a big part of this work, is creating a blueprint. And a blueprint, it can take different shapes. So it can be, for example, a customer experience map. It can be a customer journey map. It can be a service map. But essentially what this creates is a 10,000 feet view of the process across the different steps. So again, it's a way to categorize, display, and agree on information. And this kind of map becomes a central point of a lot of other connected information, because again, everything now is a digital piece that you can connect through. So I can literally click on one of these squares, go into a Notion page that describes it, jump into a piece of workshop where I gathered the information, go and to a piece of user research insight that is connected to that. So I hope that kind of gives you an idea of how powerful mixing these digital tools becomes to be able to create this understanding about a subject matter. So these blueprints could include steps to customer journey, success metrics, data flows in terms of like what data is collected to every stage, where it's being passed, back and middle office tasks. So these tasks that are sometimes difficult to understand, key pieces of infrastructure that are involved, different databases where the information sits, key SaaS platforms in your steps of the process. Maybe you have SAP, maybe you have a CRM. So it really builds that understanding. I want to just jump in and to give you a few examples of blueprints. So here's, for example, a blueprint we did for Spotify around their process of how they delivering their products. So you can see kind of activities, time, people, tools, pains, opportunities. This is laying into kind of describing, a huge amount of information that's been gathered in a very simple way that can be accessible. So here we're tracking the productivity. You can really see where things drop and the opportunities that creates. Here's one for a lending product. So you can see the different applications that are going to be involved, the user actions, backstage actions in terms of like the back office and what they do. So here there was an underwriting department that we wanted to digitalize, the different data points that are collecting, the supporting technology that we think should be used. Here's another one. So you can see they're kind of similar, but a little bit different. They retain the same format, but they are done not as a cookie cutter. They're done in a way that is right for the particular problem in place. So here, for example, it's a user management flow for a banking product. Here, we already started to align some of the designs to it. So you can kind of get a bit of a sense of what the thing is. It's a very important part of the process to build that understanding together within your team and all of the people that are aligned and the organization and the processes they touch. Okay, so I'm going to jump into week 3. This is after I reused the research, and this is kind of I gave you this information about what this blueprint is, what sort of shapes it can take. So this week is really about continuing and touching different people. It can be customers, it can be SMEs, it can be stakeholders, shaping that blueprint together, diving back maybe in a little bit more research, creating some metrics that you want to apply into this research. So for example, we in that example of Spotify, we define productivity metrics that can be tracked, that can be aligned back to the OKRs that the organization uses. So we could see really how we can create minimum change. We also kind of highlighting here jobs to be done session, and jobs to be done is a framework that we use that is super useful within this context. Now let me jump in and outline that a little bit. So jobs to be done is a framework to synthesize customer needs. So it's a really succinct way to capture what your customers actually need and how your product or solution is going to be helping them solve. So essentially your customer has a job, or they has many jobs, and these jobs are merged for the customer research. And our job, well, our tool is going to helping them fulfill their jobs. So for example, so it always takes this format: when I want to, so I can. And here's an example from a payment product. So when I need to pay multiple customers or suppliers, I want to execute batch transfers in a reasonable time frame, so I can save time and avoid the hassle of multiple single payments. So this is really kind of a neatly captured insight that we picked up from the customer that then allows us to build on top of that our solution. So we can really then connect user stories, connect solutions, connects design to this, and really understand that bridge that's being built back to kind of strategy and bridges between what we hear from user research, what we're hearing from our stakeholders, to what is actually going to be done. And using these jobs to be done and agreeing on them is a very important part of being able to start solutionizing and start finding opportunities that are meaningful in terms of change. So once we establish these jobs to be done, we can start to integrate them into the blueprint. We can reiterate on the blueprint. We can dig back into the research to clarify things that needed, kind of tie metrics around them. We kind of, within this context of the blueprint and the jobs to be done, we can build a library of tools that are aligned to the jobs, library of data points. When I say library, I usually mean that it's going to be within Notion. Again, connecting that into this blueprint. That's week 3. Really making sense of that blueprint, agreeing on your jobs to be done, and really focusing on where the opportunities are. We then spend time on prototype and testing some of the assumptions and some of the ideas that start to emerge out of the process so far. So the process, it takes the form of kind of mapping assumptions. So assumptions that we're making around the future solution. We create hypotheses around them, and we decide on signals that will tell us if we're in the right or the wrong direction. This is really kind of back to the agility and the iterative way of working. This is the space and the time to test some of the ideas that are starting to emerge from this process. So I've been talking a little bit about, let's say, that underwriting department. If we're looking at streamlining that, and we're thinking, okay, there's a lot of work that is done in underwriting by hand. We discover these hidden processes within the underwriting work, and we manage to describe them. We think that there's opportunities for improvement, and there's two assumptions that we're making. One is that customers are going to be happy to interact directly with an interface to be able to understand if their loan is being underwritten. The other one is that we can get information from third-party APIs to supplement some of the work, and essentially we can describe a process where underwriting is done in minutes and not weeks. So two assumptions here could be the user, the data. We can prototype around that and validate some of those assumptions. Again, we're moving into actually touching things as fast as possible. So prototyping can take two shapes in general: user prototype, and that is done through kind of visual prototyping, creating high definition prototypes that can be tested, some tech feasibility. So these are the 2 weeks to do that. On the basis of these, we can start to reconfigure that service flow, reconfigure that blueprint to start to shape opportunities of how the future state is going to look like. And you can see here, there's another week, which is an additional week that it repeats the previous week in a different color. This is an extra week that we align to the plan, and we always try to create one extra week that is fixed, that in the beginning of, that is not fixed, that in the beginning of the plan, we outline it that we're going to be using for something, but it could change. So that's kind of like a floating week. And in here, we're doing more of this kind of process of reconfiguring the blueprint and getting feedback on it from internal stakeholders. But it could be tech feasibility week. It could be a bunch of stuff. I'll touch that in a minute. So that week 6 and 7, we reconfigure the service flow. We outline how the service is going to look like, how the customer experience is going to look like, how the process is going to look like with this new redesigned state, outlining key areas for improving, modifying the flow, and we're continuously looping back. So we constantly want to interact with people, internal stakeholders, users, employees, to be able to understand that this makes sense and this is where we want to be going. And then we start to outline the different opportunities for change. So for example, if I'm using again this lending example, we start to outline that underwriting being digitalized is a good opportunity for change, or for example, putting in these are very simple examples, but putting in a digital onboarding could be an opportunity for change. We start to prioritize them. Just going to talk a little bit about that flexible week. What can be done in this flexible week? It can be a repeat of anything that you heard so far. Additionally, we can prototype more extensively, as I outlined previously. There's also a week that we can take to design at high definition some of the solutions that are going to be experienced for communication purposes, for alignment purposes. We call it kind of hero screens. And these are really, you saw some of that in the blueprint example that I showed, kind of really high definition screens that tell the story. We could do technical due diligence on a piece of software or platform we want to use as part of the solution. I don't know if there's a third-party API, let's say open banking API we want to use. We want to test and see if some of the information is available. We want to talk maybe to some vendors, maybe some cloud technology we want to explore. Again, all of that can happen in this week. And this is kind of the core of the work. By the end of this, we should be moving to week 8, which is really a week about tying this all together in the business case. So you could see that throughout the process, we really talked about agility and being able to change and being able to do things and talking to users and kind of really flexible approach that tries to contain design, product thinking, technology all the way through the process. This is the week where we start to look at how do we package all this information for consumption. Maybe you don't need that. That happens not often. In 99% of the time, we need to package all of this work for consumptions of somebody, a really high stakeholder, CEO maybe, or maybe for socialization through the organization or other means. But it's basically, we take the time to create a story around this work to be able to communicate it. You can see here, we will do final prioritization, we do some reality checks, and we start to package for final delivery, and then a lot of times the presentation. Just want to touch that a little bit. This a business case that needs to leave with an action plan. That is really, really important, that we don't want to end up with a bunch of Venn diagrams. We want to describe what we're doing, and then also the steps of how we're going to be moving to the next step of execution, and get those sign-offs, create a roadmap, again, final reality checks, package that business case for presentation. I will talk a little bit about roadmap, because a roadmap is an important part of being able to explain what you're going to be doing next. But I want to talk about how we think roadmaps should be done. And we really try and keep a format of now, next, later. So essentially, what you're going to be doing now, that's essentially the next step. Sign off the business case. The next step is what you're going to be doing now. Then the next step after that is what is immediately visible, is coming on the horizon, and we're going to be doing as soon as we do these first steps, and everything else is in later. We don't believe that long-term plans work. So basically projecting 2 years worth of Gantt, I don't think it's a great way of managing kind of a process. Roadmaps should be selecting the best next steps, selecting them often, and you should be reviewing the planning often. And there's, a whole kind of piece of how we do that through the implementation phase. But at this point in time of doing this definition process, we create that roadmap and we bring it to us for sign off. Just to give you an idea of a little bit about how these decks look like. They're really punchy, they're really beautiful, really bring the information to the foreground. We really edit the information for a way that somebody who's not been involved in a project can easily understand that. They're highly visual, and they're of high quality, but it's not the work. These decks are not the work. The work is what have you created through these 8 weeks to be able to take with you into implementation. Those Notion pages, these insights from user research, all of that stuff needs to go with you and needs to be used. This is just communication device. This is not the end result. So that kind of brings us towards the end. I just want to give you a few examples of it's sort of organizations work that went through this. So, for example, Spotify, we worked on improving productivity across the entire kind of internal organization around the design, the engineering flows. How, for example, describing to Spotify around all of its state, how engineers interact with infrastructure, what sort of tools they're using, how that can be modified, updated, and improved. What are the opportunities for change? Work emerges out of that, and then it's executed. Zego is a UK's unicorn insurtech. So we help them define a customer-centric telematic insurance product. This was a greenfield product. There was some kind of internal capability was involved, but very much a greenfield product. So kind of gives you two sides of organization. The third one is a lender where they had a half a billion book lent, and they needed to increase to double that, and they just knew that they cannot continue being a manual organization. The operational costs are going to rise with that lending book. They had to digitalize, so kind of helping understand how they do things now, how they can be done digitally. Went through this process as well. That's it, and I'm done. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that was useful, and very happy to answer any questions you might have. Sip a little bit of water.
Awesome. Thank you, Leon. Yeah, there are a couple of questions that I'm gonna try and get through before we hit the time. So the first question that's come through is, how flexible is this? Can it be shorter or longer?
Yeah, like I said, there is some flexibility in this process. I said on average between 6 to 12 weeks, depending what you decide to do, but it usually has all of these elements. From our experience, when it starts to drop shorter, you probably are overly optimistic of how complex the problem is, and you will need to, to make up for that. So yeah, there is flexibility in that, but this is not a 3 days, 1 week process.
Nice, thank you. On to the
Just
next.
to add to that, you should also not do this, for 6 months or a year, which we see as well sometimes. You have to start building, you have to start doing things, otherwise you're just mulling water.
Nice, thank you. Another question is, who will be engaged with this process?
Who will be engaged with this process? So I imagine this is kind of question on both sides of kind of the team that works on it. Usually would have a product strategist, a technologist, and a designer. And on the other side, kind of as outlined in the stakeholder group, there is the working group, which is people that are the closest to the project, and also kind of top level stakeholders that need exposure. That's usually the people are going to be engaged. We outline all of these roles in that first week. It's very, very important to understand who is in which category, because they have different modes, how they consume information and how you engage with them.
Thank you. Another question's just come through, and it's how do you manage availability of the team around other projects to commit to such an intense 8-week schedule?
So again, I'm going to separate that to two questions. So if it's the people that are doing the work, the working group, they have to be available for this full time. So if it's an internal team, this should be the only thing that they're doing. This is kind of one of the reasons that our clients work with us, is that they cannot dedicate this time, so they hire us to be able to do that work. And if it's for the kind of the working group and the stakeholders, it doesn't actually take a lot of their time. So if you think meeting once a week as a working group is not very intense, meeting twice through 8 weeks as a stakeholder, that's not very intense. If you can't get that sort of commitment from the kind of larger outside group of stakeholders for this process, you probably shouldn't be doing it. It's not taken very seriously. In terms of subject matter experts, if the work is important enough, there is usually enough pressure created by the stakeholders in the working group to make sure that these people are available. So this is a lot of times a gap. You need somebody's information about how they run a process, some internal person that holds a lot of information. You need to get a download of them. Your stakeholders should enable that time. They should be able to help you unlock that person. That's a huge risk a lot of times. So in these 8 weeks, being able to get the subject matter experts at the right time and the right place is a huge risk, and that should be outlined in the first week. How do we make these people available and immediately book them? Because that information could be crucial to the success of the project.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Another question, can this process be implemented into any business, or does it depend on the sector that the business works in?
I think it can be implemented into any business, into any sector. And I kind of gave 3 examples, different scale, different size, different domain businesses. I don't see, we never kind of met a business that this is not applicable to. There are some kind of sector specific quirks, in financial services or in health, but everybody, need to know what their customers and users want. Everybody needs to understand how the process looks like. Everybody needs to agree of what, how change is gonna happen. So I think it's very broadly applicable, and this is one of the reasons that we're sharing this with the community, is because it's a very useful tool that is, I think, is very applicable, and we had a lot of success with it, helping our customers.
Perfect, thank you. Another one, with some of your past clients, have you found that you need to carry out all 8 weeks, or were there some weeks that were removed or altered?
I think that this plan should be reviewed in that agile manner outlined. Every week starts with what we did last week, planning towards the next week. There's a retro in the end, so yes, the weeks have been removed. Sometimes there is a huge piece of complexity that actually we found out was not that complex, but it's usually the other way around. But yeah, it happened. And sometimes things get adjusted because of what I talked about previously, that certain information just is not becoming available. We couldn't get somebody in the organization, we couldn't unlock some part of that we needed to engage with, so there's no point to look at that. But in most cases, in general, in technology, things take longer than you expected, not shorter than you expected. But yeah, it's possible, and it should be flexible. So it's going back to the first principles. We do this to get to the next stage as fast as possible. It's not about completing 8 weeks. It's about getting as much information as you need to be able to move to the next stage. So if you think that you can shave off a week, excellent, do that.
Cool, thank you. Another one's just come in. What's your experience with ongoing success? Are you finding organizations regressing to the norm after 8 weeks of engaged excitement?
So in most cases, this creates momentum, and it creates a expectation that that things are going to progress after that to be executed. In some organization, it doesn't. Some organizations receive a business case after 8 weeks and then decide not to act on it. It happens internally, externally, it definitely happens. Good organizations are continuously on this journey. They constantly pick up pieces, they run them through this process, and they execute and implement. Some organizations find it exceptionally hard to make change, and actually this sort of process is there to help them to understand what is in front of them and how it's going to be tackled, and hopefully reduce some of that anxiety. But one of the things we noticed since COVID is that more and more organizations are really trying to do this stuff versus saying they want to do that and not doing it. But if you're not a digital first organization and you're on that journey, it's sometimes hard to get people to commit to what about to happen. And one of the things that we see happening is that sometimes organizations think that what they're about to propose is very simple, and this is kind of back to that kind of fluff. If you create a vision, we're going to be a digital first lender. That's a sentence on a slide. When you actually start to, it doesn't say anything. It doesn't create the bridges. It doesn't outline what the risks are. There's nothing in it. When you start to actually unpack that and you go through a process like that and you start to describe it, some organizations understand that this is a big shift. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of change, and they get scared. But this process is there to be able to expose that and unpack that.
Awesome, thank you so much. I've just noticed the time, so there's a couple more which I'll get back to the people who's wrote them out personally. But yeah, as mentioned, it's obviously that's all we've got time for. So lastly, before we go, I wanted to say thank you, Leon, for sharing everything you've just done today. And in over the next couple of weeks, every attendee will also receive the recording, and I'll also personally reach out to you just to get feedback and answer any other questions that you also may have. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you ever so much, everyone, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening, and I hope it was helpful. And have a great day ahead.
Thank you. Bye now.